Welcome to video 2 on the Federal Reserve. It ends up we're going to do 3 videos on this. The material is just too thick to do all this in 2 videos. So in the first video, we talked about foreign influence. In this video and the third one, we're going to talk about the formation. So in this video, we're going to talk about the early parts of the Federal Reserve, and then the third video, we'll talk about our current Federal Reserve. Our timing of this couldn't be more appropriate, meaning the negative interest rate series. Last week on February 10th, 2016, Chairman Yellen said she was open to accommodating negative interest rates. So in this series, we're trying to understand why negative interest rates have started in Europe, went to Japan, and ultimately, folks, I think we're going to see it here in the United States. We're doing all this because we just understand the trend in your portfolio and investing. You know, is this going to mean an uptrend or a downtrend? We make money both ways, but it's important to understand which way the trend is going. I think the best place to understand the Federal Reserve is to start in the middle. And have you ever asked yourself why it's called the Federal Reserve and not a national bank? Because that's what it is. Well, we've actually had 3 national banks before this one. The reason Andrew Jackson is on the $20 bill is a memorial to him betting his second presidential term on abolishing the Bank of the United States. That bank was formed in 1816, and by 1818, they had increased the money supply and issued so much credit that we are already in a world of problems. 1818, they started tightening credit, calling in loans, trying to get this inflation under control, and all this caused our first boom bust in the history of our economy. It caused the Panic of 1819. So in this panic, you had all of these banks throughout the country, and who was the largest creditor to all these? Well, it was the Bank of the United States. And it was like that scene in A Wonderful Life where someone was coming into a bank wanting their cash out, and the bank didn't hold enough cash, and they just literally started shutting their doors. So the Bank of the United States had one of 2 choices. One, they could let the Bank of the United States fold, which meant all of the shareholders that had all their equity would lose all their equity. And who were those shareholders? Well, it was all the big Eastern money concerns as well as the European family money. So as you can imagine, that alternative wasn't viable. The second alternative was all these individual banks forced them to uphold their obligation, which meant they would go under. And a bunch of them did. Bankruptcy after bankruptcy after bankruptcy. And this shift, that's what I'm going to call it, this shift of taking a national obligation and sending it down to a lower level, this pattern ultimately is what we saw happen time and time again. We saw it in 2008. The shift goes to you and me, the taxpayers. So if you were to Google the bank veto speech by Andrew Jackson, you could read it online. It's a brilliant speech. And what I did is I pulled out 3 points of the speech that I think will be helpful in understanding why this bank was abolished. So 3 points from his speech. 1, the injustice that is inherent in granting a government-sponsored monopoly to the bank. His point here is that if one bank controls all the money supply, that's a monopoly. 2, the unconstitutionality of the bank, even if it were not unjust. This is the big debate that we'll touch on in a moment between Jefferson and Hamilton. 3, the danger to the country in having the bank heavily dominated by foreign investors. This is the President of the United States saying it is dangerous to have foreign money influence our domestic economy. So with all this trouble going on, when the bank was formed in 1816, it had a 20-year charter, and in 1836, it was shut down. In fact, the charter was expired and was restructured as a state bank in Pennsylvania, and within 5 years, the doors were closed. So this was our third national bank. So let's go back in time to our first 2. Our first bank was actually called the Bank of North America, and the reason it was because this was actually before the Constitution was even drafted, and we had a lot of involvement with Canada at the time. So in 1781, this bank was established, highly influenced by Robert Morris, who was one of the founding fathers, brilliant in many, many ways, made a fortune in the Revolutionary War, but most constitutional historians think he was completely off base with the establishment of the Bank of North America, because he wanted it to be very much like the Bank of England, have high taxes to support a powerful central government, have a large army and navy in order to expand colonial outposts in foreign lands. But at the end of the day, it just simply didn't work, and by 1783 it was shut down. So that was technically our first bank, and the second bank, that was also called the Bank of the U.S., was formed by Hamilton, Alexander Hamilton, who at the time was Secretary of the Treasury. 10 years earlier, he was a protege of Robert Morris. And in 1790, the bank received its charter from Congress. Now, the establishment of this bank was the first political split in our country. You had the Federalists, led by Alexander Hamilton, and you had the Anti-Federalists, led by Thomas Jefferson. So, to frame this, make it easy to understand, let's just look at two quotes from the two leaders of these movements, and you'll get a clear picture of how controversial this bank was. So, from Thomas Jefferson, a private central bank issuing the public currency is a greater menace to the liberties of the people than a standing army. We must not let our rulers load us with perpetual debt. Oh, you mean like $19 trillion that the Federal Reserve has put on our books? Then you have Hamilton. No society could succeed which did not unite the interests and credit of rich individuals with those of the state. A national debt, if it is not excessive, will be to us a national blessing. So you can look at the language being used by the central banks throughout the world today and see where some of the roots come from. Now look, Alexander Hamilton was a brilliant founding father, critical to the formation of our country and the early success of it. But like any political process, you had different opinions by different people. The big issue and problem with this bank was the charter from Congress said that 80% of the capital used to establish this bank had to come from individual investors. And who do you think the largest individual investor was? That's right, the Rothschilds. Now, the Rothschilds already had deep economic involvement in the United States. They had a massive textile manufacturing company, and they were buying cotton from the southern states for years. But this issue of foreign involvement ultimately caused this bank to lose its charter in 1811. It was a tie vote in the Senate. The vice president of the time, George Clinton, had to cast the tie-breaking vote, and the bank lost its charter. So these are the three national banks we had prior to our current system with the Federal Reserve. So in the third video, we're going to actually talk about the formation of our current system. Thanks for watching.